had been stationed at Farath Station for 22 months when the broadcast came through. My posting was liaison work, junior liaison between the collective's Outer Watch Command and the Independent Station Authority. My actual function, most days, was translating between two bureaucracies that disagreed about what the other one owed them. It was not a prestigious assignment. I had taken it because it was available, and I needed the posting credit. The broadcast came through on a standard watch rotation at approximately 0300 station time. I was awake because I have always slept badly on stations, and I was on my second review of a maintenance cost-sharing dispute that had been unresolved for 14 months. The broadcast originated from the Human Diplomatic Channel, the formal contact frequency that the collective maintains with the Terran Compact as part of the Trade Corridor Accords. This frequency is used for routine traffic, shipping notifications, corridor clearance schedules, the occasional cultural exchange communication. I had been monitoring it for 22 months. The most interesting thing that had ever come across it was a request to adjust the hazard buoy positions in Grid 7. The broadcast that came through was flagged as a formal diplomatic notice, highest priority classification. I queued it into the station's translation stack and waited 2 minutes for processing. The translation read, "The Terran Compact has concluded its observation period for the Farath Corridor dispute. We are no longer extending observational courtesy to the parties involved. Effective as of this transmission, the Compact's full presence in this sector is authorized for deployment. We wish all parties a peaceful resolution." I read it twice. I sat with it for a moment. I sent it up to the duty officer. The duty officer pinged me back in about 4 minutes. She said, "What is the observation period they're referring to?" I said, "I don't know." She said, "How long have they been observing?" I said, "I don't know." She said, "Do we have any records of a compact observation posture in this sector?" I said, "No." She sent the transmission to Watch Command. Watch Command sent it up the chain. Within 40 minutes, I had been pulled from the maintenance dispute review and placed in an emergency coordination role for a situation I did not yet understand. What I understood at that point, the Farath Corridor dispute had been running for 7 years. It was a contested transit rights argument between the Drevath hegemony and the Orath Compact, two mid-level powers with overlapping corridor claims. The dispute had become militarized 3 years earlier when both sides began staging warships at their respective corridor access points. It had not escalated to open combat, but the staging had been ongoing and neither party had accepted arbitration. What I did not understand, that the Terran Compact had been watching. I did not understand this because the Terran Compact had not told anyone they were watching. Their formal status in the Farath Corridor was not present, no registered vessels, no monitoring interest declared. That was what our records said. That was what the corridor access logs said. The Drevath and Orath sides both operated under the assumption that the Terran Compact had no involvement in the dispute and no presence in the sector. That assumption had apparently been wrong for some time. By 0700, Watch Command had pulled all passive sensor logs for the Farath Corridor going back 6 months. What they found. I was in the room when the senior analyst presented it, and I watched her expression change as she went through the data, was this: trace engine signatures, consistent with Terran Compact vessel profiles, at 7 positions distributed across the corridor approach vectors. Not broadcasting, not active, not registering on active scans. Just there, the senior analyst said. "We have been reading these as background noise." The watch commander said, "For how long?" She said, "The signatures go back to the beginning of my log window, 6 months. If they extend further back, I need additional data." The watch commander said, "Pull all logs. Full corridor, full time window available." She pulled them. The signatures went back 4 years. 4 years. The Terran Compact had been sitting in the Farath Corridor on passive for 4 years while 2 mid-level powers staged warships and ran a low-grade military standoff around them, and they had never once triggered an active scan or a recognition challenge or an identification ping. They had simply been there, watching. I want to be clear about what this means, because it took me a while to fully understand it. It does not mean they were hidden in the sense of evading detection through extraordinary technology. It means that 7 Terran Compact vessels had been sitting in a contested corridor for 4 years, and their engine signatures were so controlled, their thermal output so precisely managed, so consistently below the threshold our monitoring systems flagged as worth checking, that our passive scanning had cataloged them as background noise for 4 years. They had not hidden. They had simply been quiet. For 4 years. The watch commander asked the analyst, "What are we looking at in terms of vessel class?" She said, "I cannot make a firm classification from passive signatures alone. But the mass displacement and the thermal profile are consistent with what we categorize as heavy capital class." He said, "How many?" She said, "7 confirmed. There may be more at distance." He said, "Disposition." She said, "They have not moved. They are in the same positions as indicated in the original broadcast. They are visible now because they appear to have gone active. Engine output increased after the broadcast transmission. I think they wanted us to see them now," he said. The broadcast said they were no longer extending observational courtesy. She said, "Yes," he said. "So they were extending observational courtesy for 4 years, which means they were in a position to do something else for 4 years, and chose not to." She said, "That is my read." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Get me the Dravath and Orth senior commanders." Both of them were on the channel within an hour. I was the liaison officer for the joint call. I translated between the collective's position, the Dravath commander's questions, and the Orth commander's questions. Neither of them had known about the Terran presence. Both of them had similar reactions: initial skepticism, then a review of the sensor data, then something I can only describe as careful reassessment. The Dravath commander asked, "Why didn't they say anything?" I did not have an answer. I transmitted the question to the Terran Compact diplomatic contact on the formal frequency. The response came back 12 minutes later. It said, "We find direct intervention in sovereign disputes to be presumptuous. We prefer to provide an opportunity for resolution. We have waited 4 years. We remain available if that would be helpful." The Dravath commander read the response. He said, "4 years." I said, "Yes." He was quiet. Then he said, "Set up the arbitration channel." The Orth commander said, "Agreed." The Ferrith Corridor arbitration process began 6 days later. I was part of the liaison team for the first 8 months of it. The Terran Compact sent 2 diplomatic personnel who were, in my observation, entirely competent and entirely unhurried. They did not seem to feel that 4 years of sitting in a contested corridor was unusual. When I asked one of them directly at a working lunch, she said, "We wanted to see if you could work it out. We thought maybe you could." I said, "And if you had concluded you couldn't?" She said, "Then we would have said something." I said, "What would you have said?" She smiled. She said, "We would have been direct about what we had available." I filed my report on the incident at the end of my posting. I wrote that the Terran Compact's posture in the Ferrith Corridor represented a form of patient strategic restraint that I had not previously encountered in my career. I wrote that the restraint was, in its own way, the most significant demonstration of capability I had witnessed. They had been there for 4 years. They had never had to say it. They had waited until the moment when saying it would accomplish exactly what they needed it to accomplish. I do not think anyone in the Ferrith Corridor disputes how that worked out.